Hey everyone, welcome back to Horse 2 Cinema, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Northman, which was directed by Robert Eggers. What can I say about this man? He is one of my favorite directors working today. His last film, The Lighthouse, was a surreal and at sometimes really funny descent into just absolute madness. Very influenced by movies like The Shining, Eraserhead, and Persona. Aware of those influences, but at the same time feeling wholly original. And though the themes corresponding to a lot of the imagery that it was using felt a bit muddled for me at times, overall I thought it was a really effective movie, especially on a rewatch. The script was really tidy, the performances were just amazing, and the overall really dreary atmosphere just made for a great experience. And his first film, The Witch, is probably my favorite horror film of the 2010s, and maybe my favorite horror film of the entire 21st century. I think it's a bit insane that a lot of people kind of debate whether or not it's even a horror movie, because I think everything about that movie, from the writing, the directing, the acting, just down to the ability for it to scare the absolute living shit out of me, was just 10 out of 10 flawless. So naturally, when I heard that Eggers was directing a Viking epic, I was just ecstatic. I was like, this is my most anticipated movie of the year. I am totally here for it. And though it's not perfect, I can't really say I'm disappointed either. I enjoyed the experience a lot. The plot is loosely based off Shakespeare's Hamlet, and it follows Amleth, a young prince who, after the murder of his father by his uncle, flees to a life of being a Viking warrior. And years later, he finds an opportunity to place himself back into the life of his mother and uncle. And at that point, he's sort of torn between his thirst for revenge and his kinship with those he meets along the way. Right off the bat, I have to say, this might be Eggers' best looking film, which, if you've seen especially The Lighthouse, but also The Witch, is really saying a lot. I was really floored by what a colorful movie this is. At times, it really is bright, and those different colors, especially the blues and greens and at times oranges, just leap off the screen in a way that I wasn't really expecting from a Robert Eggers movie, because he's known for being a lot darker with his cinematography. Obviously, The Lighthouse was done in black and white to sort of emphasize the facial expressions of this very claustrophobic story. And The Witch, although it was in color, was often did feel kind of drained of color, but I think in a really effective way, because it was trying to, sort of emphasize the deadness of this New England forest and how that's affecting this family. And I think after doing The Witch and The Lighthouse, it must have been a challenge for Eggers to sort of transition to this very colorful world and to, capture it in the best way possible. And I can absolutely assure you he did that. The aesthetic of this movie in general is just brutally good. I feel like this movie just hates me. Like this, like there's certain scenes, like especially the color palette at times in a lot of the battle sequences. Everything about this movie just looks like it's staring at me in fury. And one thing about the aesthetic that I really didn't expect going into it is that this is easily Eggers' most psychedelic film. I don't think people necessarily view him as very psychedelic. There might be a lot of other directors that come to mind when you think of psychedelic filmmakers working today, but Robert Eggers is very underrated, I think, in that regard. In The Witch, it's heavily implied that one of the reasons for all of the hysteria in this family is that there might be some kind of a fungus which is growing on the plants, which is a real thing that a lot of people, that historians agree might have played a role in the hysteria of the Salem witch trials. And in The Lighthouse, they're using a lot of psychedelic, like surrealist imagery that's very similar to David Lynch's Eraserhead, for example, to sort of show the descent into madness that comes from isolation. And in The Northman, I think it really takes these these sort of psychedelic ideas and improves on them both aesthetically and thematically. There are several different sequences that sort of feel like an ayahuasca trip, where it's sort of like, there's like this kind of initiation ceremony that happens very early on in the film that I think they alluded to in the trailer with Willem Dafoe's character. Characters sort of use this ceremony to channel their inner wolf, as they would describe it, as they try and learn more about themselves, about their fate, essentially. There's also a scene with Bjork, who is kind of like the Oracle of Delphi in this movie, and that has a very similar effect in terms of, the psychedelic and surreal imagery, and that sort of serves the same purpose of sort of guiding the character towards, his fateful journey, like this being the only way that he can sort of look into his future a little bit and learn something about himself. And on a more literal level with psychedelia, there's a scene later in the movie where there's actually people drugged with mushrooms. And you sort of see the hysteria that results from that. Very similar to, the mushroom trip in Midsummer and sort of the LSD-laced sangria in Climax. All of these psychedelic scenes, I think they were some of my favorite parts of this film. Like I said, they don't just work aesthetically, they work thematically, because this character is kind of putting himself through hell to sort of learn more about his fate and what his place is in the world. Also, one aspect of The Lighthouse I really enjoyed was the humor, and I am, happily able to say that The Northman is also a really funny movie in a lot of the same ways. Willem Dafoe does fart again, and I'm pretty sure it's scripted. There's also a scene where Amleth, the main character, decapitates someone, as he does a lot in the film, and he sort of places the head of that person in a unfortunate position. I think that if you see the film, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's very funny in a very dark way. So technically, I can't say enough good things about this film. From the cinematography, to the production design, to the acting. Alexander Skarsgård probably gives the best performance I've ever seen him give. The battle sequences in particular, there's this brilliant long take that they do kind of early on in the film when you sort of see his Viking life. Just watching him tear ass through this village, just soaked in blood and going on an axe-fueled rampage. He conveys a lot with just facial expressions in the film, like a lot of people do. I also really like Nicole Kidman. She's not in the movie a lot, but she has a couple of scenes towards the end of the film where she really gets to have fun with the character and go to some very interesting places, I'll say that. So yeah, technically it's fantastic. But how's the story? Some critics have been writing that this is pretty much just Hamlet, but with Vikings, and I can't disagree with that too much. It's definitely, there isn't a ton it has to offer narratively besides just kind of the Hamlet story or variations of it. In fact, in thinking on it, I just realized that, Amleth, the main character, his name is just an anagram for Hamlet. But there are some narrative subversions and kind of, ways that they're diverting from the general story of Hamlet that I found to be kind of interesting. Those aspects are namely with the Anya Taylor-Joy character who plays Olga, which is kind of like, Amleth's love interest in the story. And I guess her counterpart in Hamlet would be Ophelia. In The Northman, Olga actually has a pretty important role in sort of showing Amleth a little bit of perspective about what his life could be, what his true purpose should be outside of his thirst for revenge. However, I don't really think this character is fully realized by the end of the story. There are some things that we don't exactly know about her from her background, and there's a lot I would like to know about additional things she was feeling after sort of the climax of the movie happens. Because she's a very important character, and I think that she's sort of just like tacked on to the end in a very unsatisfying way. And I think they could have definitely tied her in with Amleth's full arc a lot better. And that sort of gets into my biggest issue with the film, which is how it builds to the ending. I think this is kind of bound by being Eggers' most accessible film. It's a $90 million movie. It's it's this Viking epic that I think is meant to be shared by a much wider audience than his other films. And I'm not saying he's trying to tone everything down, because in a way, I think, again, with the psychedelic imagery, and especially the violence, I think this is not exactly like an easy movie for the average person to go watch. So I appreciate that he took creative risks in that way. I just wish that he would have taken more narrative risks to try and depart from the general story of Hamlet. I think its commitment to being like a Viking epic and, a Hamlet adaptation kind of stifled the climactic tension. By the time the climax happens, you're not really still feeling that tension. It's almost like a foregone conclusion that what's gonna happen is just gonna happen. And it would have been one thing if the movie the whole time was trying to make you feel the dread of that eventual conclusion, but I don't think that's really what it was going for. I think it was trying to, build to a genuine climax in a satisfying way, and I don't think it did. And like I said, given how original and experimental his other films are, I would have liked to see more risk taken here narratively. Still though, I think the script is tidy. That's kind of a similar thing what I would say about The Lighthouse. There's, thematic issues I have with it, but overall, the arcs are fully realized, and, everything that's on the screen earlier in the movie does build to the end of the movie. And I've said before, I think the most important thing when you're watching a movie is the movie successful at making you feel a certain way? And I came out of this movie with, Viking energy. I was just so pumped after seeing this movie, and I admit I'd had a coffee in there, which probably wasn't the best decision, but this was a fantastic experience, and I really felt it. It's not perfect, certainly, but like every Robert Eggers film, there's a lot here to love. Aesthetically, I think it took a lot of risks, and I was actually surprised by the amount of risks it took. And though the narrative wasn't as risky, it is a clean narrative, and that's something that's actually kind of a rarity nowadays. So overall, I'm going to give The Northman 4 stars. I it's one of the best theater experiences I've had this year. I really suggest checking it out. I think it releases here in the UK and Ireland before it does in the US. I think it still has another week or so. So I would recommend going and check this out as soon as you can. Anyway, that's going to do it for this review. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, you can like the video down below. And follow me on Instagram and Letterboxd, and subscribe to the channel if you want. I've got more content coming out soon, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.